Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr. This is episode 307 of CryptoBiography, and it's part 14 of The Brick Wall, and here we go. Bill did his best to prepare Carson. Problem is, we know Tommy Two Shot's good, but he's fairly new. That's probably why Jake was able to tempt him to come to a local gym match. Soon he'll be beyond that. So I haven't seen him fight. Well, that's not quite true. I saw him in one fight. And? Carson asked. And he knocked the guy out inside of 20 seconds. Well, what can you tell me? He's strong, really strong, but he's shorter than you. He's really well muscled. Don't recall his weight, but I remember thinking it seemed high when it got announced. His nickname comes because, if I remember correctly, he's got a really good cross. 1, 2, and down you go, if he hits square. At the time I saw him a few months ago, all of his wins had come by knockout. Did the fight you saw him win? Did the fight you saw have him win because of one of these jab crosses? Bill thought. Yes, there were only a few hits, a bit of a flurry, but the knockout came with a hard jab that made his opponent flinch. That put him a little off his balance. The cross came immediately. With him not over his feet, he had no chance to avoid it. Did he jab around his defense? Bill closed his eye, trying to remember. Yes, well, through his defense. I think his opponent had his arms just a little too far apart. The jab hit him right on the nose, popped his head back. I think the cross went around the arm, which was more or less not moving since he was off balance and couldn't see for a second after that pop in the face. Good to know. I'm sure he could put his jab somewhere else if he needed to. Sure. Still, maybe that can help us. If he likes the jab cross, maybe I can figure out a way to avoid his jab, or maybe block the cross if I know where it's coming from. That could work, kid. Better to have a plan than just go in there and wing it. Can we practice with that in mind? You bet. And they did, mixing lots of exercise with training designed to stop jabs and avoid crosses. As the night approached, Lydia seemed to get more nervous. Finally, Carson asked her why in bed. I'm trying not to show it, she admitted, but I can't help wondering what else Jake has up his sleeve. I mean, it sounds like he basically bribed this guy to come fight at his gym. What else is Jake willing to do just to make you lose? I guess we'll find out. But in the end, it'll be me against Two Shot. Then whatever Jake has in mind won't matter. Yeah, maybe, Lydia said, resting her head on his chest. Good night. 2 days before the fight, Bill had some news. I'm not going to be refereeing the fight, he said. This surprised Carson. All the fights were refereed by Bill because he was famously neutral in the ring toward all fighters. Why? Most of the fights are between two of Jake's boxers, Bill said. Apparently Two Shot thought maybe Jake's trainer and usual referee wasn't neutral enough for him. Ridiculous, Carson said. Anyone who knows you at all knows how even-handed you are about fights. Bill shrugged. Doesn't change things, he said. They got another guy coming in. Who? Don't know him. I understand he's ref for some of Two Shot's bouts. Great. So instead of someone I can trust to be neutral, I've got some guy who might be on my opponent's side? Bill shook his head. Looks like. Is Jake really willing to go to all these lengths just to tilt the table against me? Sure. He hates losing. And to him, you losing as his boxer in his gym isn't as big a loss as losing that bet. Great. The night of the fight came, and Carson tried to keep from feeling nervous. Still, he could tell he was excited on some level. He was at the gym and dressed for the fight. He came out when Bill motioned for him. As he passed, Bill seemed to stiffen. It seemed to Carson he was trying to decide something. What is it? Bill decided to say, It's not just the referee. The judges are also connected to Coates. Carson understood immediately the implications. Any suggestions? You won't be able to win on the cards, not unless you win the round so heavily that the audience would tear the judges apart for voting against you. That leaves a knockout. But with the ref on his side, be careful. Don't aim low body blows, or you might get dinged for low blows even if they aren't. And don't throw a punch if it even might hit him near the back of his head, or he'll call you for rabbit punching." "Got it," Carson said. "Not too low, and don't throw anything if he's facing away." "If you can unleash yourself, I still think you might make this happen. Go get him, Brick." Carson nodded and stepped into the main room of the gym. The crowd roared as they saw him. He raised his gloves in the air and jumped up and down on the balls of his feet. He made his way ringside as a stranger was shouting, "In his second professional bout with his first win coming by knockout, it's Carson the Brick Wall Brax." The crowd yelled and screamed, and Carson stepped up into the ring. Oddly, he didn't have the strange roaring in his ears that he did every other fight. He could tell he was excited, but it wasn't affecting him quite the same way. In the middle of the ring, wearing a black and white shirt, was a referee who had been announced already. Carson hadn't caught the name and didn't recognize the man, who was looking at him coolly. He looked around at the crowd and was surprised to see several photographers and a few other men there. Jake had only one photographer, and that was because he was determined to keep a record of all the fights in his gym to help make it and him more famous. But now there were 4 flashbulbs pointing at him, and one of them went off even as he was looking at them. The press had arrived. This fight would be remembered, and not just by the patrons of Abernathy's gymnasium. And in this corner, with a record of 18 wins and no losses, with all 18 wins coming by way of knockout, Tommy Two-Shot Coates. Tommy Coates stepped up into the ring. He was shorter than Carson by a few inches, but every bit as wide and looked as strong as a bull. His nose was flat and crooked, as though it had been badly broken at some point, and he hadn't bothered to reset it. Here was a man, Carson thought, and knew also that he was meant to think, who didn't care about his appearance, didn't care if he got injured, didn't care what anyone else thought about anything. Here's a man who would hurt him if he could, and the referee and the judges were all there to make sure he won. But that thought faded as the referee gave them the rules. The lumpen knob of flesh Coates called a nose blistered with smallpox, bursting and bubbling. Then his entire face turned into a mass of blisters. Coates was coated in buboes, and he was going to try to kill Carson just as he had killed his family. The bell rang and Carson moved forward. Part of him was remembering his lessons with Bill, and part of him was focused on the rage he felt at Coates as the symbol of the killer of his family. Coates gave a quick jab, followed by a cross, exactly as they had practiced. He deflected the jab enough that he could then avoid the cross. He punched back and landed a solid left jab directly in Two-Shot's face. His nose turned red, but didn't bleed, and his head didn't snap back. They threw more shots at each other, mostly blocked. Carson decided to go for some body blows. No matter how strong someone was, enough blows to the stomach would take him down. He threw a couple of quick punches low, and the referee stepped in. He threw a finger in Carson's face and yelled, "Warning, low blow!" There was no way either of those punches had been below the belt. In fact, Carson was sure neither had even hit Two-Shot's belt. The audience seemed to agree. It grumbled slightly, but only for a moment. There was no winning that way. Carson couldn't go low. As if to punctuate that thought, Two-Shot hit Carson in the stomach, making him pop out part of his breath. The referee said nothing. Carson was even angrier, but he wasn't able to use his anger before the bell rang. He went back to his corner. He wished that this information that Coates used referees that made his fights easier meant that Coates was secretly a bad boxer, but that wasn't the case. He was an excellent boxer, and he had an artificial advantage on top of it. He looked across as he poured some water over his neck. The man's face still seemed to him to be a mass of pustules. He could feel his anger boiling. The bell rang, and he charged forward. Coates seemed to be a little surprised. Carson briefly wondered if most of his knockouts had been in the first round, and the man was not used to his opponents showing life past that. He threw several punches hard, looking for any opening to the head. He wasn't worried about trying for body blows. He wanted to put his fist through the face of Coates, who at this moment was every problem he had. He hit a few hard, but Two-Shot didn't seem to be too disturbed. He was punching back. Then he popped Carson's defenses to the side, then threw his cross and hit Carson on the temple. Lights popped in front of Carson's eyes, and he stumbled backward. The crowd roared.